Iyasu V, also known as Lij Iyasu, was the designated but uncrowned Emperor of Ethiopia. His baptismal name was Kifle Yaqob. Because he was never crowned emperor, he is usually referred to as Lij Iyasu, Lij meaning child, especially one born of royal blood. Early life and ancestry. Lij Iyasu was born in Walla during the reign of Menelik II of Ethiopia. His mother, Iyasu, was the eldest daughter of Menelik. Iyasu's father was Ras Mikhael, governor of Walla and long-standing friend of Menelik. Mikhael had been born Muhammad Ali and was a Muslim until 1875, when he was obliged to convert to Christianity, becoming emperor. Background. Late in his life, Emperor Menelik was confronted with the problem of his succession. If he did not explicitly name an heir before he died, the nation he had built would likely dissolve into civil war and be devoured by European colonial powers. He had four possible heirs. According to the traditional rules of succession, the next direct patrilineal descendant was the grandson of Menelik's uncle, Lij Iyasu. His other three heirs were all in the female line. The first of these was his oldest grandson, Lij Iyasu, son of his daughter Shoagerad Menelik by her first marriage to Wedijogobina. The second heir of the female line was his younger grandson Lij Iyasu. Finally, the third heir of the female line was Menelik's elder daughter Iyasu, who was married to Ras Gugzavela, nephew of the Empress II. Menelik refused to consider Tegulala, whom he deeply disliked. Iyasu was eliminated from consideration due to dwarfism. In March 1908, at any rate, Iyasu was in poor health and dying of tuberculosis. It was clear that the aristocracy would not respect a woman as the leader, says Judith, who was also not seriously considered at this time. On the 11th of June 1908, after experiencing a stroke while on pilgrimage to Debre Libanos, Menelik informed his ministers that Iyasu would succeed him. However, due to Iyasu's youth, Menelik agreed to the suggestion that he appoint a regent during the minority of his heir apparent. Until Iyasu came of age, the elder statesman Ras Nadu would be regent plenipotentiary. In May 1909, shortly before the emperor made this decision, Lij Iyasu was married to Iyasu Roman work Mengesha, the daughter of Ras Mengesha Johannes, granddaughter of Emperor Johannes IV, and the niece of Empress II. However, that marriage was annulled without having been consummated. Subsequently, in April 1910, Iyasu married Sablawangal Halu, the daughter of Ras Halu Tekel Haymanot of Gojam. Regency. Not long after his decision that Lij Iyasu would succeed him, Emperor Menelik succumbed to further strokes. These eventually left him a mere shell of his once powerful self, and incapacitated until his death in 1913. During his last years, in a bid to retain power, Empress II intrigued against his choice, intending to substitute either her stepdaughter Luzudid or her daughter's husband Ras Gugzavela for Iyasu. In response to Titu's intriguing, a number of nobles organized in an ever-closer alliance against her. On the 28th of October 1909, after a massive stroke, Menelik's choice of Iyasu as his heir was made public, with Ras wedded Nadu as regent. The new regent found his authority undermined not only by the still living but paralyzed Emperor Menelik, but also by the empress. For example, she insisted that questions from the foreign legations in Addis Ababa be directed to her, not to Tesma. Furthermore, Tesma himself suffered from an illness, which left him appearing helpless and apathetic and would take his his life within a year. It took a coup d'etat engineered by a group of aristocrats and the head of the imperial bodyguard to convince Ras Decima and Abd August to decisively limit the influence of the empress. Despite these developments, the imperial government continued to falter. Administrators were unwilling to make decisions because Decima himself might be overthrown, and foreign affairs likewise suffered. Despite this, Harold Marcus notes that the presence of Decima did curb ministerial dissensions and intrigues and was a reminder of the existence of central authority. With Decima, Iyasu continued Menelik's program of modernization, including the establishment of the first police force in Addis Ababa. On the 10th of April 1911, Decima Naju died and, when the council met to appoint a successor as Endires, Lij Iyasu demanded a role in the process. When asked whom he desired in the position, he is reported to have replied, "Myself." On the 11th of May, the seal of Iyasu replaced that of his grandfather, although not with the style of emperor. Marcus describes Iyasu's abilities as a ruler. For the very beginning of his de facto reign, Lij Iyasu showed that he was not the stuff from which great monarchs were made. He was bright, but also impulsive, cruel, lascivious, prone to depressions and egocentricities, and politically inept. Despite his vision of an Ethiopia in which religion and ethnic affiliations made no difference in a man's political or private career, he had no clear comprehension of the power realities in the empire, nor of his own position as its ruler. In the first year, he was faced with several serious challenges to his rule. On the 31st of May, Ras Abate attempted a coup d'etat by seizing the arsenal and its modern weapons in the palace, but was eventually convinced to make a public submission in return for being allowed to depart for his estates in the southern provinces. On the 14th of July, an attempt was made to poison Iyasu. The same year, Menelik's soldiers sent a delegation demanding back pay and regular supplies, which made clear that the government was on the brink of financial insolvency. Intelligence reached Iyasu's father, Ras Mikhail, of another plot, and he arrived on the 14th of November in Addis Ababa with an army of 8,000 men. This was only the first of many efforts Ras Mikhail made to keep his son on the imperial throne. Mikhail established a powerful position behind the scenes. At this point, Lij Iyasu decided to leave the capital, ostensibly on a military expedition against the Afar, but he simply traveled through eastern Shewa and into Wollo, meeting with the common people. He had promised to return to Addis Ababa in May 1912, but instead visited Debre Libanos, then Addis Salam, before joining Dajasmach Kabada's expedition into southwest Ethiopia. Here Lij Iyasu took part in a series of slave raids, in which 40,000 people of both sexes were captured, half of whom died en route of smallpox, dysentery, hunger and fatigue. Marcus explains this constant journeying beyond the capital by his will to prove that the government could not function without him and to force the ministers to authorize his immediate coronation. Once he finally returned to the capital, he came into conflict with the commander of the imperial bodyguard, which was eventually settled by the mediation of Abuna Matwus. The conflict began when Iyasu expressed his wish to the ministers that the incapacitated emperor be removed from the imperial palace so that Iyasu himself could take up residence there. Trying to please the heir, the ministers asked for an audience with Empress Titu and suggested that she take the emperor to Ankober as a change of scene that might be beneficial for his health. health. Taitu had however been informed that Iyasu was intent on moving into the imperial palace, and defiantly refused to move either herself or her husband from the palace. Informed of this exchange, the commander of the imperial bodyguard swore that he would protect the emperor in his palace with his life. Angrily, Iyasu ordered the palace complex surrounded by his soldiers and only allowed in enough food for the emperor himself. With Iyasu's soldiers in a tense standoff with the imperial guard, the situation deteriorated to the point that gunfire was exchanged, and the bedridden emperor had to be moved to the cellars as his bedroom windows were shattered in the battle. Hearing the guns, the archbishop rushed to the scene and arranged for a ceasefire. Empress Taitu then emerged from the palace to publicly berate Iyasu as an ungrateful child who wanted to kill his grandfather. She angrily declared that neither she nor the emperor would be going anywhere and returned to her rooms. Iyasu was thwarted, but demanded vengeance against the commander of the imperial bodyguard. Although he had wanted him severely punished, he was convinced to accept a sentence of banishment from the capital. Iyasu indulged in a lavish celebration, which led the European diplomats to conclude that he was purposely neglecting urgent business and impeding the ministers from carrying out their duties. Lij Iyasu left the capital after little more than a month, and during this time engaged in a raid upon the Afar, who had reportedly massacred 300 of the Karayu Oromo at the village of Sada Malka on the Awash River. Unable to find the responsible parties, he made a punitive raid upon the general population which provoked a general uprising of the Afar. On the 8th of April, after repeated messages from his father to return to the capital, he finally did arrive at the city and managed to accomplish nothing. On the 8th of May, Iyasu left to meet his father in Dessie. Iyasu's reign. On the night of 12-13 December 1913, the Emperor Menelik II finally died. Iyasu was informed of his grandfather's death, but insisted on continuing a mock battle game known as Gugs and did not allow any form of public mourning. The emperor's body was secretly locked away in a small room adjoining the Sealbet Kidan Methuri church on the grounds of the imperial palace. No public announcement of the emperor's death was made, and no requiem or any type of mourning ritual was allowed. Empress Taitu was immediately expelled from the imperial palace and sent to the old palace on Mount Entoto. Lij Iyasu's aunt, Suditu Menelik, was also removed from the palace and banished into internal exile at her estates at Fal. By mid-January, the news had slipped through the official wall of silence. On the 10th of January 1914, the leading nobles of Ethiopia had gathered to discuss the response to his loss and the future of Ethiopia. Although no records of the 1914 meeting have come to the author's notice, Marcus admits. He states that it is safe to conclude that their arrival in Addis Ababa indicated the fidelity to Menelik's heir. Quote, however, they opposed his immediate coronation, although they did approve of his proposal to crown his father, Negus of the North. Lij Iyasu showed a pronounced lack of interest in the day-to-day running of the government, leaving most of the work for the ministers to deal with. However, the cabinet of ministers remained largely unchanged from the days of his grandfather, and by now the ministers wielded much power and influence. They were constantly subject to insults and disparagement by Lij Iyasu, who referred to them as "my grandfather's fattened sheep." Quote, he constantly spoke of his intention of dismissing these shoo-ins, as he called them, and appointing new officials and creating a new aristocracy of his own choosing. His essentially reformist orientation clashed with the conservatism of his grandfather's old ministers. As Paul Hens notes, Iyasu seems deliberately to have antagonized the Shogun establishment. He lacked the diplomatic skill and the refined sense of discretion that came naturally to Tafari. Iyasu's many capricious acts served only to further alienate the aristocracy. One was his betrothal of his royal-blooded cousin Wo-I-0 Lij Iyasu to his former driver, Kifle Yaqob. Another was the appointment of his Syrian friend and crony Lij to the position of Nagadas at the railway depot Dawa, thus controlling the vast tariff and customs that were collected there. All this, combined with his frequent absences from the capital, created the ideal environment for the ministers, led by Emperor His, the Minister of War, to plot his downfall. Iyasu's fall. In February 1915, Iyasu traveled to Hara with Abdullahi Sadek, who had become his constant companion, and went to the largest mosque of the city for a 3-hour service. Throughout his stay in Hara he was friendly towards the Muslims, an act which worried the priests of Ethiopia. When he remained in this Muslim community over Easter, they were scandalized. However, the foreign legations in Addis Ababa had been lobbying for him to join the sides in World War I. According to Marcus, many of the Ethiopian nobility and commoners were impressed by the early successes of the Central Powers, and both listened eagerly to German and Turkish propaganda concerning events. Both sides sought Ethiopian support. The Central Powers wanted the Ethiopians to drive the Italians out of Eritrea. Rumors circulated that, in return for Iyasu invading the Sudan with 50,000 soldiers, that he would be rewarded with the strategic port of Djibouti. At a minimum, the Allies sought to keep Ethiopia neutral. However, some reports indicate that Iyasu not only supported the Central Powers, he converted to Islam. In August 1915, Iyasu went to French Somaliland in disguise, and without informing either the French diplomats in Addis Ababa or even the colonial government. There he spent 2 days in mysterious meetings, although Marcus states that what actually happened will not be known until information from the French archives becomes available. Literary Tekel Horariot Tekel Mariam, a fervent reformer and a one-time friend of Iyasu, states in his recently published autobiography that the Djibouti trip was something of a vacation for Lij Iyasu, and that he spent much of his time consorting with Muslim notables in the city and consuming large amounts of Q80 as well as completely depleting the funds of the Ethiopian mission in the French colony. Around the same time, the British reported that documents preaching jihad against the Europeans had been posted in the Hara marketplace. That August, the British reported that supplies were being sent to Jijiga to support the activities of Muhammad Abdullah Hassan and Sheikh Hassan Barsain, a devout Muslim pair who were at war with the British and Italians in Somalia. Then that September, the Italians revealed that one of the Somali agents had witnessed Iyasu declaring to an assemblage of Muslim leaders that he was a Muslim, and swore to his apostasy on a Quran. On the 27th of September 1916, while at the city of Hara, Lij Iyasu was deposed in favor of his aunt, Zuditu. The nobility under the leadership of Fitorari Haptegorgis had assembled in the capital and charged Lij Iyasu with apostasy, alleging that he had converted to Islam and had thus forfeited the imperial crown. The Coptic archbishop, after some hesitation, was convinced to release the nobility from its oath of loyalty to Iyasu, and he was declared deposed from the throne and excommunicated from the church. The assembly of nobles then named Zuditu Menelik as Empress of Ethiopia, and Dejazmach Tafari Makonyan as was elevated to the title of Ras, and made heir to the throne. Iyasu sent an army to attack Addis Ababa, which was met at Maso and turned back. His father initially hesitated, then marched south from Dessie with 80,000 troops. On the 27th of October, Negus Mikhail was defeated at the Battle of Segale. According to Paul Hens, Iyasu had reached Ankober the morning of the battle with a few thousand loyal followers, and after witnessing his father's defeat, fled towards the Eritrean border. On the 8th of November, Iyasu appeared in Dessie, where he vainly sought the support from the nobility of Tigray and then the Italians. On the 10th of December, Iyasu fled and took refuge with his followers on the abandoned Amber of Magdala. At Magdala, he was surrounded and subjected to an uninspired siege. On the 18th of July 1917, Iyasu slipped through the siege lines and rallied the peasantry of Wollo to revolt. On the 27th of August, troops under Abd Ag August defeated the rebels and captured many of Iyasu's generals, including Ras Imer. After this defeat, with a few hundred picked men, Iyasu fled to the desert of the Afar Depression, where he roamed for 5 years. On the 11th of January 1921, Iyasu was captured and taken into custody by Gugsa Aras Malassi. He was handed over to the custody of his cousin Ras Kassa Hailidaj. Ras Kassa kept Iyasu in comfortable house arrest at his country home at Fish. Empress Udituai, who in spite of having been treated harshly by her nephew seems to have had considerable sympathy for Iyasu's fate, is said to have tried to have him handed over to her personal custody in order that he be brought back to Christ and salvation under her guidance. In her view, the most serious part of his fate was his excommunication, and she deeply wanted to save her nephew from what she regarded as assured damnation. While her plea to have her nephew moved to the imperial palace in Addis Ababa was vehemently vetoed by both Fitorari Habtegorgis and by the crown prince. Ras Dethri Makonnen, the empress, took care that Iyasu lived in luxury and was supplied with whatever he desired. Ras Kassa also adhered to this policy for as long as Iyasu was in his custody, so the terms of Iyasu's imprisonment were not particularly harsh. Later years, Empress Uditu died in 1930 and was succeeded by Emperor Haile Selassie, who was considerably less sympathetic to Iyasu. In 1931, Iyasu escaped from imprisonment at Ficta. He apparently achieved his freedom with the aid of his former father-in-law, Ras Haile Tekel Haymanot of Gojam, although Haile Selassie claimed that the Italians had a hand in his escape, or at least planned to assist in Iyasu's attempt to regain the throne. In his autobiography, Haile Selassie reports that when Italian Baron Raimondo Franchetti landed his plane in a field outside of Addis Alam, onlookers noticed that inside it were a machine gun as well as rifles and many cartridges, implying these were to arm Iyasu's followers. Iyasu was recaptured shortly after his escape, having deeply alienated Ras Kassa with his escape, and having angered the emperor. Iyasu was taken to a fortress on the slopes of Mount Garamulata in Jarawa, where he was guarded closely by locals loyal to Emperor Haile Selassie. When the forces of Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, aircraft of the Royal Italian Air Force scattered flyers asking the population to rebel against Haile Selassie and support the true Emperor Iyasu V. It was feared that the Italians would make use of Iyasu to fragment Ethiopian resistance to the conquest. In November 1935, Iyasu's death was announced. The circumstances surrounding his death and his burial place remain shrouded in mystery. One rumor that persists to this day is that Emperor Haile Selassie ordered his guards to kill him. Others dispute this and allege that Iyasu died of natural causes. His grandson and current Iyasuist claimant to the Ethiopian throne, Lij Iyasu, claims that Iyasu's body was brought to the Church of St. Mark at Addis Ababa's Gannett Lul Palace and buried there in secret. because he had been excommunicated. These claims are extremely unlikely. Another recently published account states that Iyasu was interred in the grave prepared for Emperor Haile Selassie's confessor and almoner, Abu Hana Jimma, at Debre, Libanos. This account contends that, upon the priest's death, Lij Iyasu's remains were moved to the crypt of St. Tekel Haymanot's church at the monastery, and placed below the tomb prepared for Ethiopia's first patriarch, Abuna Basileo's family. His younger sister Zenebwerk was married off at a young age to Ras Bezabi of Gojam, who died in childbirth. Iyasu also had an elder half-sister, Wo Izero Sethan Mikhail, married to Jantira Asfor, Lord of Ambassal, whose daughter would eventually become Empress Menan Asfor, wife of Emperor Haile Selassie. Another half-sister of Lij Iyasu was Wo Izero Telabich Mikhail, second wife of Ras Selim Mongashar of Tigray, while through his imperial mother, Iyasu could claim to be descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Through his father, he claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad. Iyasu seems to have had at least 13 secondary wives and an uncertain number of natural children, several of whom have been Iyasu's claimants to the imperial throne, as well as her children like Girma Johannes. Lij Iyasu's only legitimate child was a daughter born in 1928 to him and Sablawangal Halu, Alam Zahai Iyasu, who was granted the title of Amebit Hoi by Emperor Haile Selassie. Evaluation. The Ethiopian historian Bara Zuda describes Iyasu's reign as one of the most enigmatic in Ethiopian history. A common account of his reign is provided by J. Spencer Trimmingham, who writes that his acts favoring Islam were encouraged by German and Turkish diplomats. He made the Fuqaha construct a genealogy deriving his ancestry on his father's side from the Prophet. He made prolonged stays in Hara where he adopted Muslim dress and customs. He put away his Christian wife, Romain Warq, and started a harem by marrying the daughters of Afar and Oromo chiefs, including a daughter and niece of Abd Jafar of Jimma. He built mosques at Dire Dawa and Jigjiga. In 1916 he officially placed Abyssinia in religious dependence upon Turkey, and sent the Turkish consul general an Abyssinian flag embroidered with a crescent and the Islamic formula of faith. He sent similar flags to his own Muslim chiefs and promised to lead them to the jihad. He entered into negotiations with Muhammad ibn Abdallah, the Mahdi of the Ogaden, and sent him rifles and ammunition. He then issued a summons to all Somalis, some of whom regarded him as true Mahdi, to follow him in a jihad against the Christians, and went to Jigjiga to collect an army. According to Fitorari Tekel Horariat Tekel Mariam, Lij Iyasu at one point announced, "If I do not make Ethiopia Muslim, then I am not Iyasu." Quote. He also recalls Lij Iyasu's visit to Dire Dawa in 1916, when the ruler walked into a Roman Catholic church in that city and commenced to light and smoke a cigarette while Mass was being conducted. Tekel Horariat concludes that Iyasu V was completely unsuited for the throne, and that his deposing was necessarily for the survival of the empire and the good of the people. Bara Zuda, on the other hand, while admitting that contradiction and inconsistency were the hallmark of his character and policies, notes that Iyasu's reign was characterized by a series of measures which, because of the social and economic security they implied, may well be considered progressive. Iyasu modernized many sections of the Ethiopian criminal code and created a municipal police force. The terrible. His overtures to the Muslim inhabitants of Ethiopia can be interpreted as one of trying to redress the injustices of the past, of making the Muslims feel at home in their own country. However, Iyasu had the misfortune of being succeeded by a ruler of extraordinary political longevity who found it in his interest to suppress any subjective appreciation of the man. According to Paul B. Hence, during the reign of his cousin Haile Selassie, Iyasu was practically an unperson. If he was referred to at all, it was invariably in extremely negative terms, while admitting the lack of information about this man. Hence suggests that the fairest conclusion that can be reached on the basis of present knowledge may be to credit him with good intentions but condemn him for intemperate, inept and in the end, disastrous performance. Honors. National Honors Knight Grand Cordon of the Order of Solomon. Foreign Honors Knight Grand Cross of the Order of Leopold. Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Crown of Italy. Honorary Knighthood Cross of the Royal Victorian Order.